Good morning.
Good morning, Ricky.
Sam, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. It's good to see you.
You bet. Good to see you. Think our Astros can hold on?
I think we're gonna hold on. We're gonna get it done. We certainly got a lot of offense, don't we?
Yeah, we sure do. We sure do.
That's a good thing.
If we had
Please be
another
aware
pitcher,
microphones are live over the Zoom call. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Fred Farias, and I'm honored that on June 3rd of this year, Governor Greg Abbott appointed me as chairman of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Before we call this meeting to order on the Committee of Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics meeting to order, I would like to announce that I have appointed a new student member, Representative Matthew Smith, as ex officio member of this committee. Additionally, due to concerns about having sufficient members of each committee, since we have two board members that leave the board recently or have left, I would also like to appoint myself as a regular member for each standing committee. I would now like to pass the gavel to Welcome Wilson, Mr. Wilson, to officially call the meeting of the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics to order. Mr. Wilson.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Welcome Wilson, Jr. I am Vice Chair of the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. It is 9:03 a.m. I would like to call the meeting to order July 21st, 2021 for the Committee on Innovation, Data, Educational Analytics. This meeting will be held via live broadcast. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome those joining us via video conference and ask that they observe the following etiquette. Please state your name before you speak, mute your phone when not speaking, and keep background noise to a minimum. Please record in the minutes that we have a quorum. I would like to announce the appointment of our new student representative, Mr. Matthew B. Smith. Mr. Smith is from Copperas Cove and was appointed to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Greg Abbott in June 2021. Mr. Smith will be formally introduced at our board meeting tomorrow. The next item is consideration and approval of the minutes of the April 21st, 2021 committee meeting. If everyone has had a chance to review those, members, do I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved. Donna Williams.
Thank you, Donna. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Second, Dr. Farias. Any discussion? Members, those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 And indicate anyone else by saying no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Agenda item number 3 is public testimony on agenda items relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. Mary, do we have anyone signed up to testify? We do not. So in that event, we will go on to the next item. Agenda item number 4 is consideration of approval of the consent calendar. The consent calendar includes items that can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. The consent items are highlighted items in gray on the agenda. Of course, any board member can request that an agenda item be added to or removed from the consent calendar. We're going to vote on the consent items in 3 votes, one on the approval of contracts and grants funded by the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Gear Fund, and one on the non-rule items, and one on the rule items. The board will take up an item at the meeting tomorrow and consider the delegation of authority to the commissioner to approve gear-funded grants and contracts under $1 million. Therefore, we have placed the gear-funded contracts and grants on our consent agenda. The following items up for consideration and possible action to solicit and or enter into contracts or award grants related to gear funds are Agenda item 5D, number 2, do not exceed $4 million to expand outreach and engagement of adult learners statewide to meet workforce demands through Grad Tech's 2.0 project. Agenda item 5D3, do not exceed $600,000 to support institution grants, marketing campaigns, and the design development of My Texas Future student portal in support of the Grad Tech's 2.0 project. Agenda item 5D4, not to exceed $10 million to support the My Texas Future initiative, providing comprehensive advising, resources, and support students and adult learners statewide. Agenda item 5D5, not to exceed $9 million, relating to the issuance of funds to the Texas public universities for transfer grants. Agenda item 5D6, not to exceed $8 million to design and implement user interfaces and support institutions to implement or enhance learning analytics and systems to support connecting the agency's new data pipeline. Agenda item 5D7, not to exceed $5 million to establish a centralized credential repository in partnership with the Texas Workforce Investment Council and the Texas Workforce Commission. Agenda item 5D8, not to exceed $1 million to support development and implementation of secure process to credential dashboards for institutional use. Agenda item 5D9, not to exceed $1 million for the selection of a vendor to design and implement user interfaces and related services required for centralized grant system. Agenda item 5D10, not to exceed $700,000 to support technical analysis as input to deliberations of the Texas Commission on Community College Finance and Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee. Those are all the items. Does anyone want to remove any items relating to GEAR funds from the consent calendar? If not, members, is there a motion to approve these consent items, please?
So moved.
So moved.
Please, I have a second.
So second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Members, the following additional non-rule items are on the consent calendar for consideration. Agenda item 5E, consideration of adopting the recommendation relating to approval of the nominated members of the Formula Funding Advisory Committee for the 2024-2025 biennium. Agenda item 5G, consideration of adopting the recommendation relating to the approval of the facilities audit report. Agenda item 5H, review of facilities projects submitted to the coordinating board pursuant to Texas Education Code sections 61.0572 and 61.058. Agenda item 5I, consideration of adopting the Texas Grant Program Report, Texas Education Code section 56.311C-1. Does anyone want to remove any of these non-rule items from the consent calendar?
Mr. Wilson, I don't want to remove anything, but I just wanted a clarification. Maybe the commissioner could help us. The Formula Funding Advisory Committee is really important because the formula funding obviously deals with the funding for the institutions. So just so the new members are aware, Commissioner, can you tell us a little bit about how that committee is structured and how the nominations come in?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So we have nominations come in from the institutions, and we've developed charges from the commissioner for the Formula Advisory Committee. They have to work on a pretty aggressive timeline to prepare recommendations that then come to the board, and I'll present the recommendations to the board. Those end up being important inputs to legislative deliberations about formula funding for the health-related institutions, the community colleges, and the general academics in the legislative session. This interim One of the things that will be a little different is we also have this legislatively mandated commission on community college finance. So we'll want to make sure that that the work of the community college Formula Advisory Committee complements the work of the commission, and we've got plenty of communication going across those two projects. But fortunately, the agency was charged to support the commission, so we'll be providing the technical support to both the Formula Advisory Committee and the commission, and of course we'll keep the board apprised as to all that work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, that's good for informational reasons for everyone in the committee, is because those advisory committees are very important. They do a lot of work throughout the year, and as the Commissioner mentioned, obviously for the legislative board, that process is very important. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Great, thank you. So does anyone want to remove any of the items of these non-rule items from the consent calendar? Are there any other non-rule agenda items that anyone wants to add to the consent calendar? Members, if not, is there a motion to approve the non-rule consent items, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Ricky Raven.
Thank you, Ricky. Any discussion? Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Members, next on the consent calendar are approval of proposed rules, agenda items 5J1 through 5J4. Agenda item 5J1 is consideration of adopting proposed amendments to Chapter 1, Subchapter J, Sections 1.151 and 1.152 of Board Rules concerning the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Agenda item 5J2 is consideration of adopting proposed repeal of Chapter 22, Subchapter AA, Sections 22.729 through 22.736 of Board Rules concerning the Kenneth H. Ashworth Fellowship Program. Agenda item 5J3 is consideration of adopting proposed amendments to Chapter 22, Subchapter C, Section 22.53 of Board Rules concerning the repayment of loans. Agenda item 5J4 is consideration of adopting proposed repeal of Chapter 22, Subchapter M, Section 22.265 of Board Rules concerning the authority to transfer funds. Are there any rules that anyone wants to remove from the consent calendar? If not, members, do I have a motion for the approval of the proposed rule items on the consent calendar, please?
So moved, Sam Torn.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Donna. Any discussion? Those that approve it indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. We will move on to agenda items 5A through 5B. Members, next we will take up both agenda item 5A, 60 by 30 text data insight, update and progress toward 60 by 30 text goals, and agenda item 5B, consideration approval of 60 by 30 text progress report. Ms. Lori Fay, Deputy Commissioner for Data Analytics and Innovation, will provide a presentation and be available to answer any questions. Ms. Fay.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee members. It's my pleasure to be here with you today to present this annual progress report. The coordinating board issues this report annually, although our statutory obligation is to provide this report to the governor and legislative leadership in even-numbered years. We do it every year in order to ensure that we're closely monitoring progress towards the goals of 60 by 30 and taking corrective action as needed. Next slide, please. I think you have the slides in front of you, which will probably be easier to read. As you know, the current plan provides 4 for 4 goals aimed at strengthening the economic future for Texans and Texas. The overarching goal, referred to as the educated population goal or attainment goal, is that 60% of Texans aged 25 to 34 will have a certificate or a degree by the year 2030. And that's complemented by the completion goal, which articulates a specific number of completions that we'd like to see produced by our higher education system by 2030. Those 2 goals work in concert with the marketable skills goal, which is aimed at employability for students, and the student debt goal, aimed at monitoring affordability on behalf of students in order to strengthen the talent pipeline and the workforce for the future of Texas. Under these targets, the targets under the plan also include measures that help drive focus on those areas and populations of particular interest in order for the state to reach the goals for economic prosperity. Next slide, please. As we all know, this last year brought unprecedented challenges for the state, the nation, the world, and that's particularly true for higher education and the students and families that we serve. This year's progress report reflects those challenges, and you'll note there are highlights, but also areas for grave concern. Specifically, institutions continue to make progress in reducing student debt and excess semester credit hours, which is really good news, particularly in challenging economic times. Graduation rates, while not a specific measure under the plan, are an important indicator that students and institutions are working together to decrease time to degree and decrease excess credit hours. Graduation rates for both bachelor's and associate's degrees have steadily increased since 2016, which is, again, really good news. However, there are every areas for concern. Overall, progress toward the educated population goal and the completion measure have stagnated and both need to accelerate significantly in order to reach those goals by 2030. And the high school direct enrollment rate is the lowest since the start of the plan and will need to rebound quickly in order to reach the 2030 target. The uncertainty of the pandemic certainly played a role in students' choices to pursue higher education directly following high school. Next slide, please. The next few slides, I'll go into a bit more detail about the trends associated with some of these key measures. As you can see on this graph, the educated population percentage has increased between 2016 and 2019. However, the rate of change has slowed, and at this rate, the state will fall short of the 60% goal in 2030. This trend has actually been apparent, as you can see, from early on in the plans in 2017, and the commissioners identified 2 important strategic priorities for the agency that are aimed at addressing and reversing this trend. First, a comprehensive and holistic college and career advising approach in partnership with Texas Education Agency and Texas Workforce Commission. And second, the revitalized GradTex program aimed at re-engaging Texans with some college and no credential, as well as workers displaced by the pandemic. Next slide. This chart tracks completions over the last 4 years. And you can see that there's a slight increase in 2020, between 2019 and 2020, very slight, 725 more completions. But the total lags the initial 2020 goal set at the beginning of the plan, the 2020 target, and reflects a decrease in the progression from the previous 2 years. Again, this slowing trend is driven by a 9% decrease in certificate completions in 2020. Associates and bachelor's completions were actually up a little over 2% each, which is good news. Given this, though, the rate of increase will need to accelerate significantly to nearly 5% annually in order for us to reach the 2030 targets. Next slide. In addition to tracking overall completions, we monitor completion rates for historically underrepresented populations, and that's what you see on this slide. The bars that are in color track the progress of particular populations over the last 4 years, and the gray bars are the 2025 and 2030 targets. In 2020, completions by African American students and by economically disadvantaged students increased slightly over 2019. And completions by Hispanic students increased by nearly 3%. While this is good news, particularly given the challenges of the last year, there is cause for concern. Of note is the 2.5% decrease in the number of completions by male students. And the slowing trend for each group indicates that annual increases will need to accelerate to an average of 6% to 8.5% every year in order to reach the 2030 targets. It's important also as a component of completions to keep an eye on enrollments as a leading indicator, since improved completions are likely a function of both increased enrollment and increased effectiveness at completing students who are enrolled. As we noted earlier this year in the January update on enrollments, overall the fall 2020 enrollment was down about 3.5%, with enrollment at two-year institutions down by nearly 9%. Just yesterday, we received the certified spring enrollment data, and once again, overall, the community colleges are down by about 10%. Our TSTCs, our technical colleges, are up by 12%, which is great news, and our universities are up slightly at 2%. So the university enrollment in fall and spring this year is held relatively stable, which is good news, but for our community colleges, the news continues to be concerning. This is an area that will need increased focus, both enrollment and completions, in order to reverse trends for these student groups. Next slide. We'll go to the next slide. Seems to be stubborn. There we go. One of the specific enrollment measures that we monitor under the, as part of the completion goal is the high school to college direct enrollment measure. The trend on this measure is of real concern due to continued decrease in the rate. In 2015, the rate of direct enrollment was just under 53%, and this rate has steadily declined, falling to a new low of 45% in 2020. And the actual number of high school graduates directly enrolling in higher ed is at an all-time low under the plan, in spite of growth in that student graduate population, high school graduate population. One leading indicator of high school to higher ed enrollment is the number of students completing the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. And as of early July, FAFSA completion for the Texas class of 2021 is down by about 3% overall, which is better than the national average, which is down by around 5%. But it's down more than 5% for both students of color and students who are economically disadvantaged. So we're likely to see this trend in direct to college enrollment persist into the fall. Stronger pipeline work is certainly needed if we're to reach the target for this measure and support reaching the overall attainment and completion goals for the state. Next slide. Now I'll transition and we'll end on the good news. The measures of student debt continue to trend in the right direction, which is great news, particularly in these times. 56% of Texas public higher education undergraduate students graduate with no debt, which is very good news. Of the 44% graduating with debt, the average debt is either relatively stable or falling, as you can see. There was a slight uptick in associate degree cost, but and very slight in certificate completion, but overall, those numbers have held very steady or continued to fall. Although average debt has not had large increases and debt to first-year wage has remained steady, we do need to keep in mind that many students have debt above the average debt level and fall above the average median to first-year wage percentage. Many students may struggle to pay back loans, especially in challenging times when we know nationally a lot of students have trouble paying their loans back on time. And of course, we're always particularly concerned about students who do not complete, who are more likely to default and do not have a credential and the higher earning potential that comes with earning that credential or degree. Next slide. Additional good news around the excess semester credit hours, which has significantly declined over the last 5 years. There's just a slight 1 hour increase in the associates between 2019 and 2020. We expect these positive trends to continue and to accelerate, particularly with some of the initiatives that the agency and our partners are launching around transfer and guided pathways. And institutions deserve a lot of credit for this and the student debt measure. Next slide. To summarize, we're making progress in spite of the pandemic, but there are certainly areas of concern. As you know, the refresh of the goals under the 60 by 30 Texas plan is well underway, and we anticipate a refinement of these goals in the refreshed plan. Our continued focus on these and new measures provides collective focus across the education and talent development pipelines, ensuring that Texas and Texans recover from the impacts of the pandemic and prosper in the decades ahead. Next slide. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions, and the staff does recommend approval of the progress report.
Great, thank you very much. And we've had committees that have studied, these different issues and trying to figure out, it's unfortunate we have a pandemic. You never plan that in your 10-year plan. So I can see how that's affected the whole higher education world. Overall, college advising, I agree, is very important. What do the FAFSA applications? I mean, that's good that we're not down as much as the national average, but what is that attributed to?
That's a first step that students take in order to prepare to go to college, and I think the uncertainty that we see reflected in enrollments is also reflected in FAFSA. Commissioner, anything you would want to add?
One of the things that I want to call out from what we were seeing in the data that I think is particularly striking is that juxtaposition of the students who are found either working or enrolled is pretty steady. It's about 79%, and that was actually a slight improvement over the previous year. But then that's in combination with a sudden and sharp decline in those direct-to-college enrollments, where we were off more than 6%. So we do see an uptick overall in the percentages of Texans age 16 to 19 that we find in the workforce in labor market participation. So generally, labor market participation is a good thing. In this case, there's a warning sign for us because what we see is that there's been a gravitational pull for students to work and to put off going to college, particularly with our male students. And that's not the kind of thing that gets rectified as more people get shots and things bounce back quickly, because we know that the longer that these students stay out, the less likely they are to enroll. So I would attribute the decline in FAFSA to what we see in this larger context of students opting to work and to take time off rather than to enroll directly in higher ed.
And I know we're working on comparative analysis on higher ed credentials in some form, and the payback, because the math works that if you stay the course and get a credential or a 2 or 4 year degree, your salary you make long term pays that back, and then for the rest of your life you benefit from it. So I know we're trying to figure out how to roll out that information. It's hard to, when you're young, you worry about next week, not, I know that's hard to communicate.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
We're working on that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I want to follow up your comment with a simple question. If I'm a underrepresented or culturally disadvantaged student and these numbers are declining, it seems to me my first question I'm going to ask is why? Why should I do this? And if we have a valid answer that resonates with someone who is in that position, not just some statistical thing that says way up here in the cloud, you're going to do that. If we have a valid answer, my question then is, how is that being communicated so that it resonates at that level?
So I think Mr. Torn is asking a really critical, central question. So as we're organizing our advising work, I'd argue that there are some times where the problem is a deficit of information, but there's so much information that's out there. Now, something that's overwhelming, we can present it more clearly, but we have to not just make that information available. We've got to engage the students so that they're going to make different choices about what they do next. And to Mr. Wilson's point, if you have a student that feels this urgency to either help provide for their families or not be a burden on their families, it's hard to make this case for the delayed gratification of here's what this long-term benefit is going to mean in hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars across your lifetime when the urgency is today. So one of the things I think is going to be most important in our advising work is to do this design work that Mr. Torn is suggesting, and you'll hear about as we're organizing our advising efforts. We don't just want to build more apps and put more websites out there and put more information out there because there's already a lot of information out there. I think the critical problem is going to be curating that information in a way that's going to be engaging for students and pushing ourselves to tune into these issues about how we change those behaviors, because that's importantly different from what we've done before around advising, where we've tended to treat it like an information deficit sort of problem.
Yeah, to follow up on Mr. Torn's comment, it seems like some sort of testimonials from successful graduates who were in the same position that some of these underserved students were in, that could say, here's where I was just like you, I didn't, and luckily I did this, and here's how. It seems like some sort of hands-on.
Yeah, these are all things that we can.
Examples for these students might be a benefit.
Yeah, these are all things that's going to be important for us to test and test rapidly and iterate and improve on what we're doing. So, for example, in some contexts, we've learned a lot about if you have, say, first-generation students or students from underrepresented backgrounds who you're trying to get through a single difficult course. Sometimes those students are less inclined to seek out additional help, to go into office hours, that sort of thing. And actually, what they can do is they can sort of put more pressure on themselves and double down on the kinds of strategies that work for them in high schools. So one of the things that we found through the work on the digital learning side is that the best sort of intervention, the best sort of resource may not be the faculty member, or it may not even be an adult. That many students respond better if you have somebody who, well, they know their peers don't know anything, but then the adults are accomplished and the faculty members they'll sort of put on pedestals. But if you have somebody who's sort of more like the teaching assistant, sort of almost like kind of a big brother, big sister, got a little more authority, more experience about, let me tell you how I navigated this and where I was, that kind of thing, can be more engaging for students. So that's just one example from a different context of the kind of thing that we need to test here about which kinds of testimonials and who should deliver that message. Is it better in person? Is it okay to do it online? What are and to iterate on these different kinds of interventions to find out what's more helpful so we can lean into the strategies that actually work.
By sending in a team to a school and trying these things out? Or are we giving the high schools information and hoping that they test it and report back, or how are we?
So what we're organizing the most comprehensive college and career advising effort in the nation. So some of this is because of policy changes. So the legislature formally moved the Texas On Course initiative into the coordinating board and changed the chart for the College and Career Advising Academy to put it under the the authority of the coordinating board, also moved the budget, thank goodness, with the charge. We're also scaling our ADV initiative, and through the investment of gear funding, expanding what we're doing with Advise Texas, and working in close partnership with TEA and the Workforce Commission. So part of what we're doing is we're trying to move away from having really well-meaning but more boutique kind of solutions to more comprehensive solutions that we organize in a way that we can actually test hypotheses about what's going to be effective and what's going to have impact at scale. And so we have platforms both on the training side, which is Texas On Course, where we have thousands of college and career advisors who are already connected to us, and we're going to engage thousands more, and we can iterate on the kind of training and support we provide. And then also through the student portals that we're standing up, building on the work in GradTex, and now through the My Texas Future initiative, we will have one place to curate student advising resources, and we can test ideas at scale rapidly using the technology, so that we can get the feedback of what students like, what seems to be more or less effective, what do we actually see changing behaviors. So again, this is importantly different than what we've done before with the particular initiatives, to pull them together under one umbrella in our Academic Affairs and Workforce Education Division.
That's great. Well, that's commendable, because we really need to get our arms around it quickly, figure out the best, practices, and then figure out how to roll that out to all the high schools in the state.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question also. How much are we looking at national trends and comparing ourselves to other states and trying to understand what's happening in the economy and in higher education, and how, each economy is responding to the pandemic?
Yeah, Commissioner may want to weigh in here, but I would say as a function of the refresh, the refresh of the plan, that's been a component, is to actually understand how are states tackling the overall objectives of more educated workforce in their states, excuse me, in the development of that, and then in particular, what are the responses to the pandemic, and what can we learn from what other states are doing and the way they're monitoring progress, in order to be sure that we're taking advantage of what folks are learning, and understanding, putting that our own data in the context of what's happening nationally. Anything you'd like to add, Mr.
No,
Commissioner?
just underline it. Both, I think that's important to make those state comparisons, but also within the state. That we can have very different economies in different regions throughout the state, and that's something that we also need to be attentive to.
May I add something, Mr. Chairman? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I noticed that you mentioned a 3% decrease in the enrollment of male students throughout the pandemic. Do we have any sort of idea how the pandemic might have affected sports scholarships, or the ability to join different organizations that have typically been a draw for a lot of male students? Because a lot of students I know, because I'm recently graduated from high school, I'm in the university now, they were concerned that how's this going to affect, can I go to games? Can I get discoverability to go to the next level of playing, whether it be from high school to college or from college to professional? And it's kind of hard to find the statistics on that, I'm sure, but do you think that might have been a factor in that?
I think there are probably a variety of factors that are factoring into folks' decisions, individual decisions. I think the Commissioner is right that it's highly likely that a number of our male students are deferring in order to go into the workforce. Why that's the case, I think we don't have any really good data on. I don't know, Commissioner, you speak to institutions more frequently at the leadership level, so they may have some insight, have shared some insights.
So I do think it's hard to overstate the kind of pressure that a lot of individual students feel for not being a burden on their families or helping to provide for their families. And so that's what we've heard back from anecdotally from institutions and from my colleagues across the nation. You raise a really intriguing question, though, about disruptions in athletic scholarships, and so we haven't. So there wouldn't be as many disruptions in the scholarships that were offered. Where there is an important disruption here that I think is going to warrant some analysis over time is the extra eligibility that the NCAA has afforded has severely disrupted recruiting. So there are students who might have considered certain schools or might have been good to be recruited to certain schools that there won't be spots available for them because there's additional eligibility for folks who are already on the teams, and so that is something that is disruptive that would show up in a small but important slice of those direct to college enrollments.
Thank you. And
Mr.
sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Going back to, we were discussing FAFSA and how the applications for it have been going down, particularly in the pandemic. Obviously, a pipeline and a good advising system. I know that's something that this board's working on heavily. When I was in high school, when I was an incoming freshman, the main way that we were given advice on doing FAFSA was a representative from, this might just be my particular school, but we had like a local community college rep come in, or someone who was familiar with it, come into a sort of fair, and we would get to see colleges. And obviously with the pandemic, I don't know if that was able to go into effect the same way. So do you or Ms. Fi, if you have a sort of good analysis on, do you think that maybe we should, with the plan coming up, account for more students having to be online focused with their advising? Do you think the current infrastructure for advising was able to handle the pandemic, or do you think there was something lacking there?
Commissioner, would you like to?
Well, so the infrastructure was overwhelmed, right? So and it was overwhelmed both because the modes of delivery changed. So the college fairs absolutely were disrupted. We partnered with colleges to help set up some virtual college fairs, but of course, participation in virtual college fairs assume that students are going to have access to the high-speed internet and the devices, which the very students that we're most concerned about reaching are going to have the hardest time having that kind of access. Some of the FAFSA completion fairs that the Chambers of Commerce and other community organizations have played important leadership roles in, those were disrupted as well, and definitely had an impact on these numbers. There's also this, of course, just sort of stating the obvious, is this past year has been enormously stressful on students in secondary and post-secondary schools. So there's been a spike in demand for counseling services just because student anxiety and the kind of stress that students are feeling just getting through their day and trying to navigate other kinds of challenges. The food service was disrupted. Not all students had housing to go back to. Students were counting on food service on their campuses or at their schools. Those kinds of things. So the advising and support infrastructures were completely overwhelmed. So a lot of the academic and college and career advising infrastructure that let's stipulate has not been adequate, that we've been working at scale in unique ways in Texas to bolster. There are a lot of places that had to take a back seat to more immediate concerns for students, and I think that all of that contributed to the kind of drop, especially in direct-to-college enrollments that we saw.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ravens?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I had a question that's somewhat related to the question that Mr. Torn posed. There was a very interesting article last week in the New York Times about a national challenge of high achieving, highly successful high school students who are not applying to college, but who have done extremely well in high school and have tested well, but have decided for whatever reason that they don't want to go to college, and it's a national issue. What do we know about those type numbers in the state of Texas?
Thanks, Mr. Raven, for bringing this up. This is one of the issues that we flagged also during the legislative session, and that we're very concerned about. When folks are focused on increasing higher education participation and access, they tend to assume that we're talking about students who are on the bubble academically. But of course, we have thousands of high-achieving, low-income students who don't enroll. So, and when you break that data down by race, the data is deeply troubling. So we saw nearly 17% of our African American students who qualified for automatic admission to universities not enroll, not just at any Texas college or university, but any college or university that reports data to the National Student Clearinghouse, which is more than 95% of the institutions in the United States. For Hispanic students, it was about 16.1%. For white students, it was about 10%. So these are students who've done everything they were asked to do. They won the academic awards. They could go to Texas A&M with automatic admission, so one of our flagship institutions, AAU institutions, and they didn't enroll at any college or university in the United States. So this is an issue that we've flagged and are working on with the policymakers, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow. But I'm excited about both GEAR funds that have been made available to us to start piloting some approaches and to target this issue, and also some policy changes that were made. So we have new tools in the toolbox, including we'll be working with the institutions to develop a new early high school graduation option to engage students earlier in the pipeline and provide portable scholarships. So hopefully we can make more seamless transitions for these students. Especially, it's troubling to see so many high-achieving students not enroll.
Are they being surveyed? I mean, is there an attempt to really understand why? I mean, I've heard from some high-achieving students who are delaying that they don't want to pay full boat for schools when they're going to have half an experience because of all the COVID limitations, and so they're just going to wait a year or two. So I guess trying to understand how much is this a blip and then we'll see a surge later versus, just being wooed by the economy and jobs and other options.
I haven't seen any. So what I've heard is mostly anecdotal. Also, I haven't seen a systematic segmentation of that data. My impression is that you can segment it by income. So high-income families might opt to take more of a gap year that could be structured in different ways, whereas lower-income families, it may be more around that urgency to work and to help provide for the family, especially when there was so much disruption to other jobs that the families were counting on.
You know, one of the interesting things about this article that at least I found interesting is that this trend of high achieving, successful students not enrolling actually started prior to the pandemic. And that is what is so troubling about it, that it is, it surely has been impacted by the pandemic, but it is a phenomena that started prior to the onset of the pandemic, that young people are electing after having done very well in high school, have made the decision that they don't want to pursue a college education. I mean, I I think that's extremely troubling.
Yeah, so it'd be very important to find out, to drill down as to the root cause, because you assume that if they're that big of achiever, they could get a full ride at a college, so tuition would be covered. So it may have to do with just a family support issue that they need to, what are they doing instead of going to, that they need to work, they need the income for their family.
Well, I think also the Commissioner's point is that Ms. Fai's report, thank you for the report, by the way, it was excellent. The report, the thing that stuck out to me was the 45% from the high school not going on to higher education. But specifically, Ricky, that article that you mentioned, Mr. Raven, I also saw, and that was puzzling. But the overall big picture is that that's just a specific example, but we're just losing so many students. Since I've been on the board, maybe 6 years ago, we were talking about keeping students in state rather than going out of state to Ivy League schools and keeping the top talent here. Now we're just trying to get talent into higher education, and that's become a big challenge. But I think all those come together with what the Commissioner Coordinating Board is doing with the programs and the specific programs with the GEAR money to be able to address these issues. So it's not just the high achieving students, which is an issue. Those are big numbers, but the fact is just all those students, only 45%. I mean, that's an issue.
So that's an important point, Mr. Freed. And one of the ways we stumbled on the magnitude of this issue was analyzing data to try to understand these migration patterns of students going out of state. And let me just put a marker down that we still want to keep the top students in Texas and help students understand the range of excellent opportunities that are available to them here. But we were shocked to see how many students are not enrolling at all. So we have a brain drain issue with other states, but we have an even more serious brain drain issue with students just not enrolling and just not participating.
That's very interesting. So, Lori, if you could just between now and the next meeting, whatever additional information you can determine as to the root cause of that, it would give us, I think it would help the board. Well, very interesting discussion. We could probably talk all day on it.
Malcolm, I have one thing. I think one of the contributing causes is higher ed has a perception of being really expensive. And so even if you are from a low-income family and you get a full ride scholarship, what exactly does that mean? Is it tuition? Is it books? What is it? And with the perception being college is so expensive, I think what a lot of students are probably thinking, why do I want to come out of college with a debt, and get a job that is going to take me the rest of my life to pay for the debt? So when we are looking at contributing causes, this statistic that you gave us about the graduates that graduate with no debt, that is a highlight. That is a huge point that we need to be making in everything we publish, that there are ways you can go to school and come out with debt, because I think that is a huge contributing factor on why people are choosing to do otherwise. Okay.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you for the great discussion. We need to move on, or Mary's going to give me the hook here any minute. So with that, do I have a motion for the approval of the 60 by 30 text progress report, please?
So moved, Ricky Raven.
Yeah, thank you. Motion by Dr. Farias and second by Ricky Ravens. Any discussion? Members, those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Move on to agenda item 5C, is an update on data modernization initiative. Ms. Lori Fay, Deputy Commissioner for Data Analytics and Innovation, will provide a presentation and be available to answer any questions. This item is for information only.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello again. So as is our practice, we've come to you quarterly to give you an update on the Data Modernization Initiative. This is a significant and cornerstone initiative of the Commissioner's administration and something that he identified actually as soon as he got here as a very important strategic priority for the agency. And it's aimed at, next slide please. Just a reminder, it's aimed at ensuring that we are making the most of the extraordinary data resource that we have at the agency. As a reminder and perhaps as new information to those of you who are new to the board, the agency not only collects significant administrative data from our higher education institutions, we are also the stewards of the combined K-12 and workforce education data, and we take that stewardship responsibility very seriously. That represents a really rich and amazing resource for the state, and what we're focused on doing in this initiative is actually overhauling the infrastructure, modernizing the back end, so that we can really take full advantage of the insights and the actionable information that we can make available. So you may remember this slide. We've looked at this over the last several quarters with our, just as a reminder, our 3 primary goals and work streams. But the most important thing I would want to call out to you today is that we are actually in full implementation mode at this time, which is very exciting. As a result of the commitment and the Commissioner's successful advocacy on behalf of higher education, we actually had a significant commitment of GEAR funds back in the fall that you may remember, and several significant portion of those dollars are earmarked to support the Data Modernization Initiative. And earlier this year, you all gave us the authority to move forward with deploying some of those GEAR resources, and we have done so. So we are fully into implementation mode. Over the next 12, in particular 12 months, but 12 to 18 months, you'll start to see things roll out of this initiative that will actually be the manifestation of all of the great work on the back end. So next slide, please. This slide is dense intentionally, just to give you a really good picture of the type of work that's gone on. I'll just call out a few things for you since you have the slide, and you're welcome to ask me any questions. But a few things I wanted to point out in work that's been accomplished to date. One, we have procured and onboarded significant staff resources. We have currently 17 of our 21 contractors, with the other 4 phasing in over the next few weeks. So we are fully augmented inside our internal ISS team in order to pursue implementation of all these projects under this initiative. We've actually established the technical environment for testing and development, which is a very exciting milestone for us, as we now have the technical environment in the Azure cloud available to work. We've also launched, since the last time we've met, we've launched the revised agency-wide Data Governance Council. So an important step in ensuring that our processes and decision-making around the collection and use of data are strong and robust in parallel with new data capabilities coming online. Very excited to have crested that milestone. In the center column, the work in progress column, I'll just call out for you that we have launched the projects. This initiative involves 21 separate projects that are working in concert that are laid out on a particular roadmap, and we have begun to launch those projects. Actually, I think we have maybe 7 underway right now. And with a focus on with a priority focus on establishing the public portal as one of our first deliverables. So we intentionally prioritized public-facing resources so that we weren't waiting and building this beautiful back end, but doing waiting to reveal what that back end can provide to our stakeholders. And so we're very excited to be already at work on defining that public portal. And you may know in the planned work through December, we actually do have, between now and December, an internal release of that portal to enable us to get, to have a hands-on testing situation before we turn that live on for the rest of our stakeholders. So very excited about that. The other thing I'll call out on the work to come is that we are also at work revamping and modernizing our financial aid data system. That will be one of the first submission systems that actually comes online. We also have that on the calendar, on the roadmap between now and the end of the calendar year. So that will be our first stakeholders engagement, our institutions engagement with the new and more modern approach to using this data. Similarly, on the roadmap between now and the end of the year, we will be launching a look at tri-agency data governance. So obviously, our internal data governance helps us govern the administrative data of the agency, but as the steward of the tri-agency data, we'll also be working with our tri-agency partners to strengthen and bolster those data governance decision-making processes so that we can ensure we're making maximum utility across the data pipeline. And then last but certainly not least, another piece we're very excited about is the relaunch of the agency's websites. The third work stream under this has had to do with focused on our online presence. And so, as you may be aware, we're undertaking a variety of communications efforts around rebranding, led by our Assistant Commissioner for Communications, Marjorie Barrett. And we're very excited that later this year we'll actually be debuting those updated and upgraded websites, again, to facilitate our stakeholders having the opportunity to engage with our data in ways that are meaningful to them, and also be sure that we have a coherent process for helping people navigate through what is today 18 different URLs. So that concludes my presentation. Again, this is for information only, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I just got to make a comment. I did receive a survey, which is great. I know the surveys, I wanted to compliment your assistant that's working with you on this. They sent it out to students. They sent it out to different stakeholders. So if any board members or anyone listening has gotten the survey, please return it. I think it's due today or tomorrow. But thank you for including a lot of different stakeholders in that, because as the commissioner knows, I've always thought our website can use some improvement. We've talked about that because we have so much information out there.
Right.
And it's very key information, and so we want to make it as user-friendly as possible. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks for responding.
You bet. Thanks. So we are looking for some influencers. So if any of the board feel like they're an influencer, please apply. I'm going to pass on that one. Great. That was for information. Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. We'll move on to agenda item 5D, is proposed contract and grant approval. Agenda item 5D1 is consideration and possible action to solicit and or enter into technology services contract totaling up to $1.5 million to support creation and implementation of the student public portal in furtherance of both the GradTex 2.0 initiative, associated labor market tool, and other future agency initiatives to be funded by federal Wagner-Peisner 7B funds granted to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by the Texas Workforce Commission. Ms. Tiffany Tatum, Director of Strategic Initiatives, will provide a presentation and be available to answer any questions. Tiffany?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm before you today to seek your approval to allow the Coordinating Board to secure technology and other resources and supports for the GradTex 2.0 program, an initiative focused on re-engaging Texans with some college but no credentials, and Texas workers displaced by the pandemic, and to support them in pursuing a high-value credential. On October of 2020, the Texas Higher Education Foundation contracted with TSYS Technology for the initial design and development of a student-facing portal using private philanthropic funds. The initial prototype of this tool has been accomplished and now needs to be built to scale statewide. The Texas Workforce Investment Council has provided $1.5 million in Wagner-Peisner funds to the Coordinating Board to support My Texas Future, and by extension, the GradTex 2.0 program, through the design and development of a tool to make critical labor market data available to Texans seeking to understand in-demand occupations and career pathways that afford job quality opportunities. The Coordinating Board is to procure a data tool to be integrated into the My Texas Future portal currently under development. This tool will initially target those individuals who have stopped out, dropped out, or not yet begun an education or training program, including unemployed Texans, and Opportunity Youth ages 16 through 24. Those funds are also available to support the expansion of the student portal and its key components, which include the following elements: education and training search to provide access to higher education institutions and workforce providers via the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, the Texas Workforce Commission, and Texas Crew's website. A resource search, which will allow exploration of a library of information of published articles on topics relevant to education, training, and career development. And a career and job search to give access to users to a Texas labor market data tool that will assist in career and employment search planning, and the Texas Workforce Commission's Work in Texas website, which will allow direct employment search. This data tool and the Work in Texas website will allow users to access information about occupations, earnings, and training or job searches and applications. The data tool will feature growth projections and occupational value metrics, with data broken down by Texas's 28 local workforce regions. Users will be able to search by workforce region, occupation, and interest, and translate that data into a more targeted employment search. Planning efforts are complete, and now the Coordinating Board seeks approval for use of the additional funds to continue to advance the development and implementation of the My Texas Future website and the labor market portal. Specifically, the Coordinating Board proposes to solicit and engage in technology contracts for assistance in the web and UI/UX design development and implementation. Staff recommends approval. This completes my remarks, and I am now available for any questions.
So as far as the, it's a great effort, and it's great that the Texas Workforce Commission has provided us funds to do this. Have the vendors been selected already? Will there be an RFP, or is this an extension of existing contracts, or how do we spend the $1.5 million?
Yep. So currently, while we do have a vendor we have been working with, the intention is to expand and seek out another vendor to help us with our statewide scale efforts. With regard to the labor market tool, as I mentioned, planning is complete, but we do need to procure someone to help us take that forward.
So just to kind of bigger picture on what we're working on, and I do want to commend Brian Daniel and his team. They're great partners at Texas Workforce Commission. Lee Rector from TWIC and the governor's office has been really strong partners in this work. So what we're working on together is a single portal, building on the work that Tiffany is leading with the GradTex 2.0 effort. So the vision is to have one place that we can drive traffic to My Texas Future. Under My Texas Future, where we curate these different resources so students can explore different options, they can identify programs, get that clear line of sight, not just to achieving credentials, but what that means in terms of job opportunities. And this is all going to be driving towards a warm handoff to institutions. So also close partnership with our institutions to help identify and engage students and help them make that transition so that they're going from exploration to actually enrolling in these programs. So we will need to identify a vendor who will help us be able to realize this vision for the portal that we can take so that we can take that statewide, and then for some of the tools that are underneath it, including building on the work that we launched with the Texas Workforce Commission and the Brookings institution to make labor market information available about what kinds of jobs folks have lost, what kinds of occupations are projected to grow, are projected to be good jobs into the future.
Great. Any other questions?
So already, I appreciate the question, Ms. Williams, because I do also want to call out the important partnership with the Greater Houston Partnership. It has been also very helpful in incubation and development. Those partnerships with chambers of commerce and employers are going to be as critical for taking this initiative to scale, for the coordinated marketing efforts and also for curating the resources underneath the portal.
Right, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. Members, do I have a motion for the approval of the consideration and possible action to solicit and/or enter into technology services contracts totaling up to $1.5 million to support creation and implementation of the student public portal in furtherance of both the Grad Text 2.0 initiative, associated labor market tool, and other future agency initiatives to be funded by the federal Wagner-Pfizer 7B funds granted to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by the Texas Workforce Commission. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved, Ms. Donna.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Do I have a second? Thank you. Any discussion? Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Agenda items 5D2 through 5D10 and agenda item 5E were approved on the consent calendar. We'll move on to agenda items 5F is consideration of adopting the recommendation relating to the certification of gifts that are fundable through the Texas Research Incentive Program, TRIP, for the emerging research universities. Ms. Emily Cormier, Assistant Commissioner for Funding, will present this item and be available to answer any questions. Please.
I'm bringing you the board certification for the Texas Research Incentive Program, or TRIP, as you mentioned. TRIP has been in place for over the past decade and is intended to incentivize the 8 emerging research universities in the state to pursue external donations and gifts to support their research activities. To do this, TRIP provides state matching funds for the private gifts. Gifts are matched based on the tiered system where the state dollars increase as the amount of the private donation increases. Since the start of the program, the state has appropriated almost $400 million for TRIP, and this has matched approximately $500 million in private donations to these universities. The legislature appropriates these funds to the coordinating board, and we distribute it to the institutions. However, the amount of gifts has outpaced the amount of appropriations, resulting in a backlog of gifts to be funded. The backlog for matching funds currently sits at around $230 million. So we're here today to certify the latest round of gifts received by the universities, which is required by statute. The gifts go through a review process, including a peer review where institutions can challenge submissions, and ends with the certification and matches by the board. For this board item, staff recommends certification of 96 gifts worth $39.5 million in donations and an associated state match of $27.5 million. In your materials, you can see a breakdown by institution. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
And how would I see the schedule here of gifts and who they were going to and the amounts. How was that determined?
That's based on donations made to the institutions and then submitted to the coordinating board by the institutions.
Got it. So the institutions solicited gifts?
Yes, sir.
Great. Any other questions on this? If not, members, do I have a motion for the approval of the certification of gifts that are fundable through the Texas Research Initiative Program TRIP for the emerging research universities, please?
So moved. Sam Torn.
Thank you, Sam. Do I have a second? Second. Second. Thank you. Any discussion? Members, those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Agenda item 5G through 5J, 1 through 4 were approved on the consent calendar. Move on to agenda item 6, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved, Donna.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed, say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. We are hereby adjourned. We'll take a short break.